Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collingwood for YouTube. I'm here to continue my read-along review of the Dark Shadows Daybook written by Patrick McCray. The Suffering Olympics by Dana Gould. Sorry. The vampire legend as we know it today originated in Eastern Europe in the late 17th and 18th centuries. People associate vampires with Transylvania because that's where Dracula came from. And also England because, well, that's where the book Dracula came from. Barnabas Collins also came from England, or at least so he claimed when he showed up. But it's where he showed up, Collinsport, Maine, in a good old US of A. You see, one of the secrets to Dark Shadows' undying success, in my humble opinion, is that although it says Gothic is all get out, it's as American as apple pie. It's about a family, and really messed up family, wealthy and powerful to all outside observers, but messed up, effed up, and compromised to the core behind closed doors. And what could be more American than that? The Collins family came out of the 1960s. Let's look at the other preeminent American family from the 1960s. The preeminent American family in the 1960s. The Kennedys. The Kennedys were American royalty, the envy of all. But behind closed doors, things were not as wonderful as they appeared. Joseph Kennedy, the family patriarch, made his money in bootlegging liquor, and if not illegal, certainly ruthless and shady business and stock deals. A Vanity Fair article in 2004 reported that when the Kennedy boys would bring girls home to visit, the minute they left the room, their father would try to hop into the sack with them. Female visitors to the Kennedy home were advised to keep their bedroom doors locked at night because father prowls at night. Talk about dark and spooky. Joseph Kennedy Sr. was the ambassador to the court of St. James. That's the American ambassador to England in the dark days prior to the World War II. Now, Joseph Kennedy was isolationist who strongly advocated for the appeasement of Hitler, which did not go over well with his boss, President Roosevelt, and eventually Joseph Kennedy was recalled. His reasons were self-interest. In its purest form, morality never entered into it. War was bad for business, and he didn't want his sons pulled into an armed conflict for fear something might happen to them. Screw everybody else, to their credit. His sons did not share their father's feelings. His oldest son, Joseph Jr., and his brother, John F. Kennedy, both enlisted in the Navy. Their youngest brother, Robert, wanted to join, but was too young and had to wait until the war was practically over before he was old enough to enlist. Now, what's the point of all this? How does this relate to Dark Shadows? Well, I'll tell you. Pride. Pride goeth before the fall, as the old saying goes. The Kennedys were America's first family, wealthy, powerful, good-looking, but for every glamorous success, they were visited upon by an equally brutal tragedy. Joe Sr.'s oldest child, Joe Sr., died on a mission in World War II when his plane crashed over the North Sea in 1944. His daughter Catherine would die in a different plane crash in 1948, and it was Joseph's dream that his son, Joe Jr., was sent to the presidency of the United States. And upon his death, that responsibility would fall under his younger brother, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Jack Kennedy almost didn't make it out of childhood. His early years were spent largely in hospital beds, recovering from a series of illnesses. He joined the Navy in World War II, where he commanded a small PT boat in the Pacific Ocean. It was torpedoed. He survived, but he injured his already compromised back and would spend the rest of his life in constant physical pain from his back and from the effects of Addison's disease, for which he suffered greatly, but kept hidden from the public. As everyone knows, he was murdered in 1963. His brother Robert attempted to follow in his footsteps and was murdered in 1968. If the Kennedy family history in the 1960s was written as a soap opera, it would be rejected for being too hard to believe. And this brings us to the Collins family, and in their own fictional way, is the only American family that I can think of that give the Kennedys a run for their money in the suffering Olympics. Roger Collins, a wealthy, powerful, widowed alcoholic with a psychological train wreck of a son, lives in his family's vast mansion in Collinsport, Maine, with his sister Elizabeth, who has her own problems. It turns out Rogers sends a guy named Bert Devlin to prison for a crime that he committed, and now Burke is out of jail, wanting to destroy the entire Collins family. Then Rogers' estranged wife comes back from Phoenix, only she's not really his wife. She's in fact a Phoenix. And then Roger's sister Elizabeth gets blackmailed by another guy who knows something about that she killed, only it turns out she didn't really kill him. All this before a cousin named Barnabas shows up from England. And as it turns out, he's a vampire. A big, handsome, toothy New England family. That's as glamorous and wealthy as it is compromised and tragic. And we can't seem to get enough of them. And the reasons is obvious. They remind us too much of ourselves. Look at any wealthy, powerful, famous American family. Whether it's the Kennedys, Bushes, the Trumps, the Kardashians, the Jacksons, they all should be named Frankenstein. They are all freak shows, aren't they? Now, look at your family. We all put a good face on for the public. But behind closed doors, we all have our Rogers and our Quentins. My oldest brother talks to his truck. My sister has way too many cats. My brother married a girl that I made out with in high school. Talk about an awkward wedding. And though nobody's is leaping out of their coffins to grab the family handyman by the throat, we all have things we don't discuss outside of the family. We all have our dirty secrets. And that again is why the Collins family, or the Kennedys, or God forbid the Kardashians, hold us in such a thrall. Because of our families, no matter how good a face we present to the public, when the light hits us just right, we all cast a dark shadow. Dana Gould has been a began his professional comedy career at the age of 17. Between Comedy Central, HBO, and Showtime, Dana has 6 solo stand-up comedy specials to his credit. with the tour film Joyride with Bob Cat Gothway, set to premiere at in late 2021. He has appeared on The Late Show with David Letterman, Jimmy Kimmel, Conan, Marion, and Real Time with Bill Maher. He is an actor. Dana has had memorable turns on Seinfeld and Parks and Recreation, and is one of the few actors to play his live-action self on Family Guy, as well as appearing as himself in an animated form on The Simpsons. He was a cast member of Frank Darabont noir crime drama Mob City, in addition to numerous roles in films, such as cult horror anthologies Southbound and Tales of Halloween. He was a writer and producer for The Simpsons for 7 years, created the comedy horror series Stand Against Evil for IFC, and is host of the Dana Gold Hour podcast. Look at this, guys. See that? 1966. Welcome to the beginning and end of the world, Miss Winters. Episode 1 and episode 1245. Dark Shadows is unique among serialized television. It's a Mobius strip. Begin where you want. Stop where you want. The plots fit into a larger story. Until recently, it was one whose end and beginning were rarely seen, since most viewers began the show around episode 212, with the release of Jonathan Frid's Barnabas into 1967. The idea of the first episode of Dark Shadows was arguably the moot technicality. I-1 is indeed the first in 1966. It was contemporary today. It's as much a period piece as anything else on the show. For modern viewers, it's all a flashback, especially the present episode 1 and the final episode of 1245. Exist both as opposite ends of the series and as neighbors. They are bookends and yet still occupy the same space. Watch them together and you might find a remarkable continuity, not of plot, but rather of theme. This is even more remarkable when recalling that one of the two installments takes place in parallel universe. But when the difference is 131 years anyway, I'm not sure that's germane. Last week often feels like parallel universe to me. Primary time or parallel, it's still Dark Shadows. Look for long enough and you'll see what I mean. In episode 1, an isolated Liz squabbles with her athletically repressed brother, Roger, over the impending arrival of a new governess, Victoria Winters. Victoria spends most of the commute from New York absorbed in a convenient flashback, raised in a family home. Vicky is puzzled by her new appointment. Why would she be hired to groom the Collins heir without so much as an interview? With no key to her past and no clear path to the future, Victoria is escaping one destiny of plunging into another. Brooding business tycoon Burke Devlin and diner waitress Maggie Evans. Do their best to warn Victoria away from her new job at the mysterious mansion by the sea. Having swiped away on destiny, Vicky arrives at Collinwood, unfazed by the signs and portraits, and it begins. In episode 1245, at the end of the series, in 1841 parallel time, protagonists Bramwell and Catherine survive their night in the haunted lottery room. There, Catherine refuses to join the ghost of Brutus Collins, and yes, a bizarre act of unnatural love, thus stopping the spirit from strangling her true love outside. Jealous Morgan awaits. As dawn breaks, he shouts Bramwell and carries Catherine to the roof. There he tussles with the knob, Kendrick, and plunges to his demise. A wounded Bramwell comforts Catherine, and across the estate, a revived Marlene is reunited with Kendrick, and the two couples celebrate the defeat of the Collinwood's first and last curse. The difference between episode 1 and episode 1245 are both obvious. The subtle by 1245, the braille cream beehives and black and white are distant memories. And while both installments are equally intense, one is a Pyrandowski study in existence against the other is a truly gothic ghost story, where love defeats the anguish of the past. Episode 1 begins just past sunset, and episode 1245 arrives with the rise of the sun. Still, this storytelling blend of chalk and cheese intones the same message. Collinwood has no future unless it opens its doors in both 1966 and 1841 parallel time. Collinwood is dying. Both Collinwoods are cages for the sins of yesterday, and their witnesses both find the eventual path to the future by embracing newcomers. Both Catherine and Vicky stand apart from Collinwood, and yet belong outsiders whose examples transform it into a home for the living rather than for the dead. Each house is haunted, in one form or another, by the ghosts of husbands, Brutus and Paul, whose marriages gave way to disaster by opening their fortresses of aristocracy to strangers, despite its secrets, or because I don't skip these pages, or because of them. The Collins saved themselves after decades of standing apart. They illustrate and outmaneuver the definition of insanity by at last trying something different. June 27th falls at the end of Pride Month, and one day before the anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising. Concomitantly, Dark Shadows is cited as a place where outsiders find haven. which it is, but not necessarily on the surface. When looked at character by character, most of the outsiders are seeking curses to be normal, a disturbingly conformist goal by modern measures. How can the show be seen as inclusive with such a problematic perspective? And yet Dark Shadows is still inclusive down to its storytelling DNA. To the outside world, Collinwood has alienated itself from being any kind of healthy, normal home. It is obsessed with guilt over crimes we learn to question with a Randy-like skepticism. Crimes with context, crimes that in some ways were not crimes. Brutus was not justified in his wrath, and perhaps Liz was. In the light of Paul's subsequent and cruel manipulation, by silence he commands our empathy. Maybe not a fireplace poker's worth, but empathy nonetheless. If this were a true crime, Liz would not have been forgiven by this series. But she is. Her journey to freedom begins by welcoming Victoria as family. Catherine Heritage is similarly welcomed. 125 years in a mirror universe. Prior, these are stalwart strangers who change the closeted world by asking the right questions when they don't understand and taking decisive action when they do. Decisive action when they do. At its inception, Dark Shadows seems to focus on outsiders, bargaining their way into Collinwood, seeking curses for their differences, reconciled after 1,225 chapters. Dark Shadows is actually reversing this idea. It shows an establishment opening its doors to those who still know how to thrive outside them. In doing so, Dark Shadows of tradition is consigned to where it belongs, the past. Episode 72. While Vicky is accused of corporate espionage, a mysterious stranger tests the freshness of Maggie's roast beef against Agent Johnson, Clarice Blackburn. Carolyn attacks Vicky over her date with Burke, causing Vicky to contemplate resigning. Meanwhile, Bill Malloy's former housekeeper, Mrs. Johnson, weasels her way into Carolyn's heart, winning a job at Collinwood. Later, we learn she is a mole for Burke Devlin. Dark Shadows is known for its widely eccentric characters, and Mrs. Johnson is introduced with such a flourish that she may top even Count Patofe in a tightly controlled, anticipated fashion. Catherine Lee Scott is always very careful to praise actress Clarice Blackburn, and her characters are so dowdy or unpleasant that this catches me off guard. That's a testament to her acting. I instinctively respond to her characters on a very visceral level, forgetting that there is an actress inventing them. If the art is in concealing the art, then this reaction is more telling and authentic, and efficient, yes. Then a standing ovation. Meeting Sarah Johnson is like doing a keg stand where the keg is filled with a strange mixture of moxie pop and life bitter rest and disappointments. Deliciously so, an eccentric stick in the mud, to say the least. It makes sense that she is Bill Malloy's former housekeeper. The implication is that although they never shared a bed, they might very well have been lovers, or something even more intense. Her reminiscence of Malloy comes in a strange, focused monologue, and its reverberation of just what an influential character Malloy continues to be. I appreciate the effort of the show to root its action and flavor so firmly in the great state of Maine, with all of its forbidden down east eclecticism. Malloy had that quality, and he and Mrs. Johnson seem like the only characters who can be imagined putting up with the other in a domestic circumstance. Her idea of a greeting is demanding to know whether Maggie's roast beef is fresh, with brazen abstinence somewhere between large Marge and Frey Blucher. She manages to make a simple restaurant inquiry sound both strange and filthy, and definitely insulting. She then begins grinding away on the subject of old mayonnaise, as if she's discussing the filthy outlaw who shot her kid brother, and it's clear that Mrs. Johnson is here to stay. With a vaguely well adjusted in a homicidal way. Household planting a spy for Burke Devlin is just the touch of espionage intrigue that Collingwood needs. Finally, someone actually is the spy that Vicky is accused of being. And in the same episode, no less, with the irony and subtlety of an anvil landing in your lap. That kind of duality, especially among the backstairs staff, is a concession to the dramatic thinking that Dark Shadows kind of lost over the years. The show gained plot, but it lost those opportunities for characters to reflect on one another. As it reached a supernatural frenzy, this early authorial delicacy was a necessary casualty. However, it's vital to know they sculpted in duality like Mrs. Johnson and Vicky. Like Mrs. Johnson and Vicky is an instant swimming in the program's marrow. Just before we find out Mrs. Johnson is a spy for Burke, the show treats us to a marvelous confrontation between Victoria and Elizabeth. Tired of the paranoia and old money gatekeeping, Vicky tells Liz she's more than happy to quit working rather than put up with it further. We rarely think of Vicky as having this kind of backbone, but it's axiomatic to who she is. Little moments like that sustain the dignity of the show in its early years, and the actors take marvelous advantage of the opportunity. No, there may be no cursed hands and body switching, but the red meat drama of those early months is more than a match. Anybody, and by the way, I think it's pretty clear that Bill Malloy is a candidate to be Harry Johnson's real father. Watch the episode and get back to me. Look at this, guys. Check this out. Check out that. You can see that. Check that out. That is cool, isn't it? That is so cool. Okay, guys, I'm going to stop here. This is where I'll begin tomorrow night. Check that out. Check that out. 1967. And that's where I'm going to start tomorrow, guys. Like I said, this is going to take a while. So I'm sorry if I jumbled some words. Again, I'm not the best reader, but I try. So I'm enjoying this. I think this is just really insightful. I love the beginning episodes. The beginning, this talked about how most people started with episode 212. Barnabas's debut is episode, 212 really. 211 is when he gets out, but 212 is when he talks, get in the house. I watched Dark Shadows in the summer of the 90s, and the episode I watched first was the first episode, and I was hooked. So that's how I became appreciative of those beginning episodes. I got to see them. Do I think it matters when you see Dark Shadows from? I think it can. Because what you're more familiar with is something that is ingrained into your brain, if that makes sense. I'm not trying to add narrative to the book. I'm just trying to give you my own perspective. I'll give a great example. A friend of mine, Dave Shorter, shout out to him. He knows who Barnabas Collins is. But I say Victoria Winters, he's like, who? See? Who's that? The governor. What governess? Barnabas is one of those figures that is larger than life. And I think if you miss Vicky, if you miss Alexander Iles' portrayal of Victoria Winters, it is something you need to go back and watch. I do think it is. I agree. It's well worth it. Everything, the spy, the best television spy ever is Mrs. Johnson, okay? So I hope you enjoyed part 2. Guys, link's going to be in the description box. Go pick this bad boy up. I am enjoying it so far. I love Dark Shadows to death. I love talking about it. I love getting to read about it. It's fun. Dark Shadows is fun. Alright, guys, good night.